Live on tape, Work in Progress, a World at Work podcast about work, life, and everything in between. With award-winning radio host Tom Alexander and WorkSpan's Not Safe for Work columnist Charles Epstein. Here are your hosts, Tom and Charles.
Welcome to Work in Progress. I'm Tom Alexander, along, of course, with Charles Epstein.
Hey, Tom. I don't want to pull a Rodney on you, but I tell you, it's been a rough week, as I'm sure anybody bearing the burden of the Epstein surname will tell you, given that creep Jeffrey Epstein, who's all over the news.
Oh man, yeah. No, I take it people are asking if you're related.
Yes, exactly. I tell them no, we're not related. Absolutely not related. Maybe we share an ancestor from the old country, but if you go back far enough, we'd all find connections, some unsavory characters. I'm sure there are some Alexanders or Alexopouloses. Did I pronounce that right?
Good try. That's good try. It's Alexopoulos, but that's
I knew I was going to get that wrong, but hey, a B for effort. But there must be. I'm not even going to try it. There must be some version of Alexander's out through history you'd want to distance yourself from. No.
So some versions, yes. Yes, I would think so. There are a few, and I've got a long story that I'll tell you in some other show. But yes, no question. Over the years, people would ask if I'm related, to Jason Alexander. But I think, But that was less because of my name and more because of my Costanza-like characteristics and behavior.
Yeah, I think we've all been at various points of our lives infected with that. But in any case, but the Epstein thing, actually speaking of Seinfeld, it reminds me of the episode, you probably remember this, where Elaine is dating a guy who shares the same name as serial killer Joel Rifkin. And there's that great scene. They're at a Giants game, I believe, and he's paged over the PA system, Joel Rifkin, and she's looking for a place to hide.
Yeah, that's right.
But it's fun. Well, funny is probably not the right word in this context, but the more people ask, the more I feel compelled to just express my disgust for the guy. He's ruining the good Epstein name. I should probably just say no and move on, but I feel a need to add some elbow grease to be, a little bit more convincing. Of course, we're not related. He's a monster. Are you out of your mind? I hope they hang him from his ankles. He never sees the light of day.
The highest yard arm. Right?
Yeah. And if he does see the light of day, at least he's upside down,
Yeah. Well, it's not right that you should feel you have to defend your good name. Though it's never too late to change it, Charles. Nothing too radical. Just something that puts a sliver of daylight between you and any other Epstein you don't want to be associated with. Like Epsman. I like that. That's not bad. Epsman kind of rolls off your tongue.
Too Jewish. Sorry.
I know how we can run everybody out of Rock Ridge. How? We'll kill the firstborn male child in every household.
Too Jewish.
Yeah. Epstein, I always thought that was a little too Hollywood. That's actually an old Lenny Bruce joke. But anyway, several years ago, 2016 to be exact, actually Epstein came in handy, at least theoretically. I was in Chicago. I think I told you this when the Cubs won the World Series. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking if I needed a table, I'd put out that I'm the first cousin of Cubs president Theo Epstein, but I'm not, but put it out there. And but unfortunately, the opportunity never came, but it was nice knowing I had that in my back pocket.
Yeah. Well, speaking of surnames, one of our guests today is the former Mets legend, Ron Swoboda.
Oh, man, I can't tell you how much I'm looking forward to that.
I know you are, Charles, but speaking of names, now, while Ron Swoboda might have been a journeyman player, he had an amazing career and really shouldn't have any regrets. But I can't help but thinking with a name he might have had a better career in hockey. I mean, listen to that. Ron Swoboda. It sounds like a hard-hitting defenseman from the Maple Leafs or the St. Louis Blues. Great hockey name.
Oh yeah, or Ron Swoboda, middle linebacker. I totally hear that. It's a name that lends itself to contact sports.
Yes, well, on the theory that your name is destiny. I mean, your parents name you Pee Wee Herman. Chances are you're not going to become the next MMA champ.
True.
Well, anyway, the aforementioned Ron Swoboda will be joining us. And also, we'll be speaking with Rick Smith. And he's the CEO and founder of Axon. And very interesting, I guess you could say, self-defense alternative. We'll be speaking with him as well. This is Work in Progress. My partner's name, of course, is Charles Epstein. I'm Tom Alexander. Back in a moment.
Executive compensation pros have one of the toughest jobs in HR. Seriously. They must always feel like they're about to step into quicksand, an alligator den, or on a landmine. You get the picture. Thank goodness for the Executive Compensation Forum, the one place where they can share freely, confidentially thanks to Chatham House rules, about common challenges and best practices to attract and motivate executives while being compliant with a host of regulations and keeping the board happy. There's a heavy focus on peer-to-peer conversations, in addition to connecting with and learning from the leading minds in executive compensation. The 4th Annual World at Work Executive Compensation Forum, July 28th through the 30th in Denver, Colorado. Go to worldatwork.org/events to register.
Meet the Mets, meet the Mets. Step right up and greet the Mets. Bring your kiddies, bring your wife. Guaranteed to have the time of your life, because the Mets are really socking the ball, knocking those home runs over the wall.
Ron Swoboda played right field for the New York Mets from 1965 to 1970, the Expos 1971, and the Yankees from 1971 to 1973. Afterwards, he was a TV sportscaster in New York, Milwaukee, and New Orleans, where he provided color commentary for telecasts of the Marlins AAA club. He's the author of a new book. It's called Here's the Catch, a memoir of the Miracle Mets and more. And in it, Ron tells the stories of that amazing season, the people he played with and against, and sometimes at the same time, and what life was like as an everyman ball player. We're thrilled to have him join us now. Ron Swoboda, welcome.
Oh, thanks, guys. Thanks for reaching out.
It's great to have you. And of course, I'm joined by my partner, Charles Epstein. Charles?
Hey, Ron. This is really a treat. I'm thrilled we get to spend some time with you reliving some of the most memorable moments of my childhood. You see, I was born and raised on Long Island. I became a Knicks fan and a Jets fan, but I was always a Mets fan, or at least that's how it feels.
They seem to gather most of their fandom from Long Island, and, I lived on Long Island, so I felt the heat there. It was good. Wish I could have stayed longer, but we're looking back at 50 years to a time that was pretty amazing in America, and obviously pretty miraculous for us.
I say that I feel like I was always a Mets fan, but I sort of became a fan of the other teams, which is, I guess, why being a fan could feel like a religious experience. You don't question it where it came from. It just is. But yeah, the 69 Mets will always be the team. My team, after years of failure and frustration, suddenly the hapless Mets are beating the heavily favored Orioles in 5 games, become World Series champs. And it was absolutely magical when the ball landed in Cleon Jones' glove, which I remember vividly to this day for the final out. Absolute, total, unadulterated joy. So 2 questions.
Yes.
Yeah. Two questions. We have more, but just two quick questions. In your book, you talk about how you probably shouldn't have taken that much of a risk to make your iconic catch that kept the Mets in the game 4, that they went on to win. Had you missed, and let's face it, the odds were not in your favor, it might have ended very differently, I dare say, with near Buckner-esque consequences.
That's a good question, and I'm sitting here in New Orleans. We're waiting to see what a tropical storm named Barry turns into, if it's a hurricane, and that's got us a little upset. But your suggestion of that I should revisit my play and what happens if it gets by me, I'm more disturbed by that, because I don't even like to think about it, because it probably means that that ball rolls to the wall. The runner at first base, it was first and third. We were leading by a run.
Right.
My catch turned into a pretty elaborate sacrifice fly. But
Right.
if it was a 2-run triple, we trail the Orioles. In game 4, they have a chance to tie it up at 2 games apiece. And I don't even, the thought that you let a powerful squad like the Orioles back then back into the World Series, you open the door for them, is disquieting even 50 years later.
Yeah, well, you kind of answered my ultimate question, which is going to be, have you ever had any nightmares where you didn't catch the ball?
Well, it exists as a possibility, and obviously when you make a catch like that one, it looks like it had more chance to get by you than you did to catch the darn thing. But, I didn't have a whole lot of time. It would have taken me more time to sort of rationalize my route rather than just react, and what I did was just break on a ball and take the best route I could. Most of the way there, it looked like I was in trouble, but I stayed on my line, and when it looked like I needed to lay out, I laid out to my backhand, and the thing hit me solidly in the web. Now, if it hits you solidly in the web, there's a chance you could have deflected it if you don't catch it. So I think that possibility is one that nobody ever talks about. That the chatter, even 50 years later, is about, if you don't get it, it's a triple. If you do get it, it's an out. Well, there was a little room in between there to deflect it, knock it down. We're still in trouble if I don't catch it. Let's face it. The Orioles, with 1 out, would have scored the tying run anyway, and it would have been probably a double at the very least if I just knock it down. So yeah, either way, if you don't catch the ball, the story changes in a way you're not going to be happy with.
Yeah, well, I guess the two saving graces. Number one, if I'm not mistaken, Boog Powell was the guy on first, right? So you had to get him over to third, which would have been an achievement. And Brooks is the hitter. I don't think at that time he was very fleet of foot, but still, it would have been trouble.
Brooksy, but Brooksy was a very talented guy who was having a very ordinary World Series, and now he makes pretty good contact off of Tom Seaver in a key situation. And I come out of the blue and rob him, and which is ironic because Robinson at third base made a career out of taking base hits away from people. So maybe that was the fairness on my end.
By the way, going through this, I didn't remember, but Seaver pitched 10 innings that game, right?
In that age, he expected to go at least 9. If he needed to go another one, they had no compunction at all about running him back out there, because he was Tom Seaver, for crying out loud. He was the best we had.
Yeah.
And the odd thing, too, is if he loses that game, he loses 2 games in the World Series. And I didn't want that to happen.
He won he lost the first game. That's right.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so, it was very much in the balance. Everything balanced on the tip right there. That's the tipping point of the World Series, that play, that moment. If you don't make that play and they win it and get back in, and you're just you're a pumpkin in somebody else's Cinderella story.
No doubt. Now, my second question, you've been at the center of this story of the Miracle Mets for so long, 50 years. What, from your unique perspective, has made this team so deeply memorable, maybe even meaningful for so many people?
I think the unpredictability of it, the fact that we had no track record that indicated we should go as far as we went, and how this thing built. And I think not being a team that people pointed towards and developing later in that year, we pick up Don Clendenin in mid-July after we went on an 11-game win streak afterwards. So we made ourselves relevant. Then the team made the trade for Clendenin, and it didn't cost us any of our impact young arms. So now we're a little stronger at first base with a guy with big-time power, platooning with Ed Kranepool. And then we start rolling along, and the Cubs look like they're going to hold. We're playing as good as we could play, and the Cubs don't look very gettable. Even though they're playing older guys every day, they're a 4-man rotation, and a 1-man bullpen named Phil Reagan, who is, of course, the right now temporary pitching coach of the New York Mets, which he was the bullpen for the Cubs back in 1969, while he is, and so they weren't as deep in arms. They weren't as deep in the bullpen, and they didn't platoon at many spots. So we probably had a little battery power going, when we got into the late August and the Cubs start to fail. And we're playing the best we can play. We're winning 3 out of 4. And that's when we rolled by them like they were sitting on the side of the highway changing their flat tire, and that we passed them like that and never looked back.
That's amazing. And considering the Cubs had 3 Hall of Famers at that time, with Ernie Banks and Billy Williams and Ron Santo and Ferguson Jenkins. I forgot about him too.
Well, Ferguson Jenkins was, yes.
Amazing.
And here's the deal though. They played day ball in Chicago, and that takes a toll on you. And they were more, they were older guys, and I don't know if that's what did it or just the pressure. We kept pressure on them, and they had to constantly look at the board and see where we were. And when we started moving on them and never relented, that was a tough thing for people to predict. So that unpredictability of us developing the way we did, as and to win 100 games when the franchise had ever won was 73 the year before. So that was a hard thing for people to get their heads around. And I think in New York, where things were so fractious and the city was in trouble, the mayor, Lindsay, was in trouble, there was all of this identity politics and the Vietnam War and anti-war and, Woodstock. There were so many different things filling in so many different boxes at that time. And the least predictable might have been the course we went on, leading to a World Series and a win there.
Yeah, wow, that is amazing. Yeah, 1969 was a real event-filled year, pivotal, incredible. Like
and we were the good news thing. We were the good news
Yeah.
thing that really everybody could get around. I mean, we were the feel-good story that everybody could get behind. So maybe that helped us implant with so many people back then. And you know, how lucky for us. I just turned 75 years old, and you still meet people that tell you, you know, how those moments and those times filled out their young lives in a meaningful way. And you're like, man, what a privilege, you know, what a privilege.
Well, yeah, that's great. And I can honestly say, as a baseball fan, I will confess, Ron, I am a lifelong Phillies fan. My partner is a lifelong Mets fan.
Yeah,
but
my deepest condolences.
Thank you.
But Doug McGraw, our relief pitcher, who got a World Series share with us, was saved the 1980 World Series and the deciding game for the Phillies. So you have some connection there that's legit.
Big time. And I will say this, that, you know, like every kid growing up, he has his heroes on his own team. But I will say that my biggest hero growing up on an opposing team was your teammate, Tom Seaver, who I just thought, I always wished he was on our team. He was amazing.
Seaver was the franchise. He was the first guy that gave them respectability And I'm going to tell you this, Kuzman was also of that ilk in my book as a pitcher. When you had those two guys, you weren't going to lose a lot of games in a row. But Seaver was Hall of Fame quality when he came to the big leagues, day one. He had Hall of Fame stuff, Hall of Fame confidence. That's what Seaver was. And we missed him. I was in New York at the dedication of 41 Seaver Way, and his daughter Sarah gave just an amazing talk, and was nervous as heck, and it was so authentic and so legit, celebrating the fact that they renamed that street outside Citi Field after Seaver. One of the most appropriate things the Mets have ever done.
Yeah, that's great. When's the last time you've spoken with him?
Last summer, we went out to Calistoga. Art Shamsky, who's campaigning a book himself, took me, Jerry Kuzman, Bud Harrelson, and himself out there to visit Seaver at his home. And we visited. Tom walked us around, and Tom was really doing well. He was all there, and he talked about having bad days associated with, it's dementia, and it's exacerbated by Lyme disease, and it wasn't going to get better. But we had a wonderful day with him. He walked us around his vineyard where they grow amazing Cabernet and make an outstanding Cabernet wine. GTS, that is big and round and complex and all the things I love in a Cabernet. So no surprise that Tom Seaver, Hall of Famer, would make a Hall of Fame red wine.
Oh, that's great. You touched on 69, and Tom mentioned 69 as being such a pivotal year, so much going on. In your book, you talk about the bubble that ball players tend to live in, where they're able to keep the outside world, from intruding. So you can put all your focus on how you're going to prepare to face Fergie Jenkins the next afternoon. Although in that case, I guess it was Art Shamsky who'd be facing him. But it's 6
and good for him.
yes, that's a day you're happy to take off. But so at 69, there's a lot going on, as you mentioned, the war, Woodstock, the race riots, and your team was a pretty diverse lot. I was reminded of this when reading the recent New York Times piece on Cleon growing up in segregated Mobile.
Yes. What's interesting is in trying to understand the disparity that exists today, I've read a few things, and the worldview of individuals was not as polarized as it is now. Well, it was much more stacked around the middle, and Democrats could talk to Republicans and make deals and do legislation and make Congress work the way it was supposed to. They could do that back then. Now it seems completely dysfunctional, because the worldviews, what conservatives think of liberals and liberals think of conservatives has spread to the far ends of the spectrum too often, and it's almost a visceral, reaction, almost a gut reaction, and it's not even intellectual anymore, I don't think.
Yeah, but at the time, how aware were your teammates?
I think we were just a bunch of non-stars who tolerated one another, and believe me, winning is always the glue in any team where the players didn't pick the group. We didn't choose ourselves. We were put together, and now that team that is put together has to figure out its identity and what it's about, and we seem to work it out. You hung with the guys you hung with, and didn't feel any pressure in that regard. Northern guys and Southern guys and California guys and conservatives and African American and Caucasian. We just put it all in the pot and let it, stirred it up just like a real good gumbo down here in Louisiana where I live. It has a lot of elements in it, and if you mix it right and make a good roux, you got something.
I'm also sure it helped that you had a commanding figure in Gil Hodges to keep everybody together.
Oh, man. Yeah, really. Look, the fact that he's not in the Hall of Fame tells me that there's something wrong with the process. And he's got another year, I think, with the veteran committee, and I'm just hoping they open their eyes up and learn how to add, just add up his career as a player and his impact as a manager and his character, and that was so important to us. And in doing my book, I go back and look at all the play-by-play sheets of 1969, and you go through it day in and day out, and you see the moves he made, why he made them, when he made them, and you realize how often they were just right on the mark. This guy was one of the most adroit baseball minds I ever played with, and I played for Gene Mock, who was allegedly a genius.
A little general.
Well, and he won what? He never won anything.
Yeah, he never won.
Right,
yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And I don't blame that on him, because I really was rooting hard for him with California when they just turned inside out.
We're speaking with Ron Swoboda, of course, a major league player for 9 seasons with the Mets, the Expos, the Yankees, longtime broadcaster. And his current book is Here's the Catch. And, of course, it's available wherever books are sold. And, Ron, I just got it yesterday, and I was able to thumb through a good portion of it, and it's just so entertaining, and it's funny, occasionally scatological, at times sentimental. You quote Langston, all those things. You quote Langston Hughes and refer to art and music, but above all, it's honest, particularly your appraisal of your career, your on-field performance. Looking back, are there any things that you would have done differently as a player?
Yeah, I would have gotten along with Hodges if I could have figured out how not to annoy him, because bottom line was, this is as good a man as walked the earth. All he wanted you to do was act like an adult and make yourself the best player you could make, and help the Mets win games. And I could do some of that some of the time, but not all of it all of the time. And I struggled with authority, and his authority sometimes felt like it was leaning on me pretty hard. And, I kind of thought I knew how to carry myself as a player and how to prepare myself and all of that. But Gil had his way, and you had to do it his way. And there wasn't a darn thing wrong with his way. His way would have been fine. And if I could have just swallowed it and moved on and not made a deal out of it, or not acted out like I would occasionally, and opened my big mouth when it contributed nothing to the overall effort. And that I would feel much better about my career, no matter what the numbers were, if I had a better relationship with Gil Hodges. And I found out later on, I wish I had known this at the time, but Gil was with the Marines in World War II. He was on Tinian Island in the Marianas before he left to go to Okinawa. And everybody knows the series of awful battles in Okinawa in World War II, if you read any World War II history. My dad was a waist gunner in a B-29. He landed on Tinian. Hodges left in early March 1945. My dad landed there late March 1945 and was there for the duration, came home and lived a long and productive life until he was 96 when he passed away in late April last year. If I had known those two guys were on the same island at different times in World War II, it might have helped me bridge the gap a little bit, but I didn't know it.
That's an interesting perspective.
I only found that out a couple years ago. I wish I had known it back when, but I didn't have that knowledge. And Gil, like most of the guys in World War II who had seen horrible stuff, they didn't want to talk about it. He didn't talk about it to his son. Tom Seaver one time asked Gil, what was it like on Okinawa? And Seaver was in the Marine Reserve, and Gil said, if you wanted to know what it was like, you needed to be there, and that was it.
Right. Yeah, my dad was in Europe, Patton's army.
Yes.
Then he was Japanese occupation for a year. Same thing. Greatest Generation is also the most buttoned-up generation. You could not wrench any information from them.
Yeah, I think until Brokaw and that Greatest Generation and that whole thing, and they started celebrating them a little more, that some guys finally came out and spoke in ways that they couldn't, because, you see horrible stuff, things that your eyes just should not see. You spend the rest of your life running away from those memories, trying to distance yourself from them, and it's impossible.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, as you probably know, Jim Bouton, author of Ball 4, passed the other day. For those who don't know, Ball 4 was basically the Pentagon Papers for baseball, exposing a lot of behind-the-scenes shenanigans, gave a lot of people a glimpse into what really goes on in the locker room and beyond. Perhaps you can share with our listeners what it was like being a ball player when that book came out.
Some of us, I was finished in baseball when the book came out, and took the classic, what happens in the clubhouse stays in the clubhouse kind of attitude about it. But in truth, I think Bouton's book was it proved itself to be good for baseball, that people saw them as human beings now, and I think he opened the door to that, and was really one of the first guys to do that. And he and Leonard Schechter wrote that book, and it was a meaningful piece of sports literature, and funny as hell, and with a little time and historical perspective, changed my mind about its significance.
Ron, reading your book, there's talk about your deep interest in science and space, and you talk about, even mentioned one of my favorite movies, 2001: Space Odyssey, when it came out, and you weren't too sure about it when it first came out, but then you've grown to really appreciate its scope. And tell me a little bit about that, the interest that you had. I think there's a perception sometimes of ball players. It's like, they're focused on their careers, they're focused on baseball only, but you really had a wide-ranging interest in science.
Well, I cared about flight. I love airplanes, airplane history, and of course, space flight was just an extension of that. And as a kid, there was a guy, a former German expatriate who came over, became an American citizen, named Willy Ley. And Willy Ley, L-E-Y, wrote these wonderful books about spaceships, rockets, spaceships, and outer space. And he projected science, not science fiction, and talked about what it would take in rocketry to get into orbit around the Earth, to go from orbit around the Earth to the moon. He really made it seem like this was going to happen, and it was his books later on were illustrated, and I ate them up. I did a lot of science fiction reading too in high school, but this was science projecting what the knowledge we had and where it would have to go. And that whole satellite, that big sort of donut-shaped rotating satellite out of 2001 was really Willy Ley's image of the thing that that the movie borrowed. But the movie had artificial intelligence. Hal, the computer, who was thinking on his own, and just the fact that the monoliths in 2001 seemed to show up at various points in our history where we were making gains as Homo erectus, Homo sapiens. We kept discovering these monoliths. And the interesting thing, they thought about putting aliens in the movie, but they never did. And I think that made it even more powerful because it was more believable.
Yeah.
As the projection. It's a fascinating, piece of movie making that holds up, I think, as well now as it did back then.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I just recently, I grew up in a movie theater. My dad and his brothers had a movie theater, and I saw it when I was very young. Yeah, I saw it when I was very young, but I just recently took my son to see it at the IMAX in just the full spectrum, and it was just incredible to watch it and see things you did not pick up on initial earlier viewings. It was just incredible.
Well, the director was an amazing guy, made incredible movies over time, and in so many different genre, incredible. And I'm a huge movie fan. I love movies. I love great performance, and I try to see everything. And I'm a member of AFTRA SAG, so I get that I vote on the AFTRA SAG awards every year for movies and TV stuff now.
Oh,
so man, I mean, it's what, it's allowed you to kind of grow up and expand your just your being a little bit. I'm a big art fan. I kept my membership in the Metropolitan Museum in New York City, and when I'm in town for anything, if I've got time, I just cruise on through there, or the Guggenheim, or the Whitney, or the Museum of Modern Art. I need to see that stuff because I decided a lot of years ago I wanted to learn something about art, and essentially autodidacted most of it.
Yeah, well, that's often the best way to be self-taught and follow your passion and so forth.
Hey, man, that's
yeah. Well,
what
the next
your brain
time
is for, man, to put stuff in.
Yeah. Well, the next time you and I happen to be in New York, seated together, maybe I can appoint you as my official docent. You can take me around to some of these places.
I'd be happy to.
Give me some.
I'm not
context.
Sure. It's been a beautiful ride, and I love still having a curiosity I need to feed, at 75. That's a blessing.
It is. How long have you been in New Orleans now?
We've been in New Orleans since all but 3 years, since 1981, and it's a place has interesting culture, music, food, and an art scene here that's pretty vibrant. So I've been able to chase around all that stuff. When I first got here, I had become a pretty good fan of jazz music, so I chased that around. The late sets at the jazz clubs used to be 11 o'clock, no more. They're earlier now. And when I got here, I did the 10 o'clock news, got off at 10:30, and my wife was already in bed. So if there was something I needed to see, off I went to catch live music and talk to the musicians afterwards, because they were all, I was a sports guy, and they wanted to talk about the New Orleans Saints, and I wanted to talk about that gig they just did,
That's always the case. And musicians
we had a
want
good
to talk
exchange.
to athletes and vice versa.
Yeah, it was a good exchange, man. I'll tell you what, it's been a wonderful ride.
Yeah, it sounds, I know you can't beat the shrimp etouffee in New Orleans, but New York, Ron, I doubt Ron Swoboda ever has to pay for a meal or drink again.
Well, no, I'll pay for the meals. I just made a crawfish etouffee the other night for my grandson and my son and his wife. So you live in New Orleans, you got to learn how to make a couple of these things, how to make a good gumbo and what it takes, and an etouffee. They're all roux-based, and I've learned to execute a few of those dishes.
Excellent. Well, after this is over, I may have to send you my email so you can send me some choice Swoboda family-proven recipes. Yes.
I'd love to.
That's great. Ron, listen, I'll tell you, I know I could speak for Charles when I say we could go on and on and on and make this not only a podcast, but a podcast series, because your storytelling is wonderful. But thank you.
It's great of you guys. Great of you guys to ring me up. I appreciate it. I had a lot of fun writing that book, and what you said about it made me feel like you got it, and you're very kind. I tried to tell the truth and have some fun with it, and put a little grin on your face, and put honest feeling into the thing. And if I didn't do that, I would be disappointed.
Well, once again, you hit a home run. I can tell you that. It's just wonderful. And I just want to thank you so much for coming on and joining us. Ron Swoboda, a major league player for 9 seasons with the New York Mets, the Montreal Expos, the New York Yankees, and of course, as you know, a longtime broadcaster. You can get his book. It's called Here's the Catch, a memoir of the Miracle Mets and more. It's available wherever books are sold. Ron Swoboda. And we'll be back right after these words.
Echo, 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 ande. Giacomo fino andande, Giacomo finale. My spy boy to your spy boy, sitting on the bayou. My spy boy to your spy boy, mo set your tail on fire. Talking about it now, here now. Echo, echo, ande. Giacomo fino andande, Giacomo finale.
You're listening to Work in Progress with Tom Alexander and Charles Epstein.
Mama rain to you, my rain, sitting on the bayou. Mama rain to you, my rain, don't say your thing on fire. We gone down the bowl.
Calling all sales compensation pros. Come for the networking, stay for the innovative ideas, news, commentary, and debate. If sales compensation planning and design are part of your job, you won't want to miss Spotlight on Sales Compensation, August 10th through the 21st in Chicago. This niche conference dives into nuances and complexities of sales comp strategy, a driving force of bottom-line success. Hear from pros at Marriott, Avis, Ernst & Young, Siemens, Dell, Cisco, and many others. Pay gaps, AI, incentives, channel selling, compensation risk indicators, mending relationships between sales, HR, and finance. It's all covered at Spotlight on Sales Comp, August 10th through the 21st in Chicago. Go to worldatwork.org/events to register. Rick Smith is the CEO and founder of Axon Enterprises, developers of smart weapons that protect life in the moment of conflict, cameras that depict the truth, and help prevent civil unrest, and automated reporting and evidence management that will triple the amount of time officers can spend serving their communities. Rick started Axon out of a garage. Today, more than 17,000 law enforcement agencies in over 100 countries around the world are part of the Axon network, which is now listed on the NASDAQ. And he joins us right now. Hey, Rick.
Hey, how are you today?
Doing great. I got to confess, this is something that really is really surprising and quite interesting. I'm going to be flying solo here as my partner, my co-host, Charles Epstein, sends his apologies as he's on assignment, but he did send a question in, and I'm going to lead off with his question, and I'll refrain from doing my Charles Epstein impression. First, he has an observation and then a question for you. He says, I always thought Chris Rock's idea to curb gun violence made a lot of sense. Rather than put the emphasis on gun control, shift focus over to bullet control. Now, if every bullet costs $50, you'd be a lot more deliberate whose posterior you maybe put a cap in. When we argue about the best way to limit the epidemic of gun violence, it's fair to say that it's becoming an issue with a small but not small enough segment of people working on the front lines of law enforcement. Now, we've all seen these video cams that capture seemingly innocuous encounters that quickly escalate, sometimes with deadly consequences, sadly. On your website, it states that the overall mission of Axon is to protect life and obsolete the bullet. Now, how exactly does Axon do this, and how do your solutions promote safer, even more effective law enforcement?
Yeah, so if you think about it, the reason that police might kill someone is actually not because their goal is to execute the person in question. They use lethal force because today it is the most effective and reliable way to stop a threat. The way to break this down is if we can develop technology that is as effective or even more effective at stopping a threat than a bullet, then we can give police a better choice. To use a very simplistic analogy, if you could get Captain Kirk's phaser from Star Trek, and when you set it to stun, if it was 100% effective every time and immediately effective, then you would actually use that before you would go to a gun, because guns are actually not immediately effective every time. Now, if you hit somebody in the head, which is very hard to do with a pistol, yes, it's going to be effective very quickly because you've basically destroyed the brain. But, which, is grotesque as a thought, but it is effective. But if you shoot somebody in the chest or the gut, they're probably going to die, but it may take a while. So, in fact, if that person has a gun and they can continue to shoot back at you, the fact they're going to die an hour later is no consequence to you if you're the police officer who yourself gets shot and killed. So what the officers really want to do, or I could extend this more broadly to anyone who's using a gun on another human being, the legal and moral rationale to do that is because you're defending yourself, and that today a gun is the most effective way to do that. Our approach is simply to say, look, we believe energy weapons can actually be faster and more reliable than a gun. They're not there yet today, by the way. The taser weapons that are in use by police around the world are highly effective, but they're not yet as reliable as a gun. So you wouldn't use a taser in that instance yet, but part of the reason I wrote my book, The End of Killing, is to lay out this thesis and to set a goal that if we can get non-lethal weapons to be faster and more effective, then there's no longer a legally acceptable rationale for why you would kill someone.
You started Axon, formerly called Taser, from a garage. Now, how did you first get the idea to start a company that made non-lethal weapons for law enforcement?
So I was living in Europe in the early 90s, and two friends of mine were shot and killed in a road rage incident in the quaint city of Scottsdale, Arizona, while I was living in Europe. And to me, it was just shocking, the idea that, people I knew, gun violence was no longer an abstract thing. It was something that became very personal. And also the realization that, frankly, we're not safe anywhere. I mean, Scottsdale is about as safe a little golf community as you could think of. And even there, people are gunning each other down. And the guy who killed Corey and Todd was a businessman with a gun in the glove box, no prior criminal history. So he wasn't some homicidal maniac. He was somebody who got into a situation that was spinning out of control, and he used his gun. Candidly, he probably thought he was defending himself. Well, now he's spending his life in prison. His life is ruined. My two friends are dead. And in that incident, it struck me, as I thought about it afterward, that a gun was really not the right instrument that person wanted to use to defend himself, and it resulted in a three-way tragedy. And the realization that came to me was that it's sort of strange that we're sitting here, in the early 90s or even today, that the state of the art in self-defense is this medieval technology that's about 400 years old of shooting bullets at people. And as somebody who aspired to be an entrepreneur, a bit of a science fiction fan and techie, I quickly thought, rather than relying on, government regulation or gun control, we should just make these things obsolete by creating something better that legitimately protects people and that breaks this link, this idea that, well, protecting me means killing you. That's crazy. Like, the idea of protecting yourself shouldn't require that you take another life in the process.
It's an unbelievable story, and I did not know about the loss of your friends, and we're very sorry to hear that. I know you spent decades on this topic and recently wrote a book about it, which you alluded to, The End of Killing. Tell us a little bit about the book and what you want people to take away from it.
Well, I think we live in a hyper-polarized time right now, right? Like, when you talk about policing, you tend to get very polarized opinions. Either police have a tough job to do and they can do no wrong on one end of the spectrum, and on the other end of the spectrum, that police are, aggressive thugs who are maybe over-policing certain communities or highly biased. And, of course, I think the truth lies somewhere in the middle. Life is complicated. Police work is a difficult job. Sometimes they make mistakes. And ultimately, what I'm trying to lay out is a vision for how we can solve some of these problems and move beyond the debate. I don't think we're going to change anybody's mind on gun control. Like, some people are very passionately in favor, some people are very passionately against. We've not been particularly effective in whatever regulatory means at actually reducing the number of people who die of bullet wounds. And I'm not deprecating anybody's opinion there. I'm saying I want to stay out of that debate. Ultimately, the way we as human beings really solve problems is through innovation and invention. We solve diseases by finding cures. We, solve even simple technologies like clean water a few hundred years ago dramatically improved the human condition. And what I'm saying is, look, let's get past waiting for politicians to solve this for us. We need to innovate our way out of this. And in the book, I actually, it was a little risky for me to do this, to come out and basically say, look, we actually think we can make the bullet obsolete. That's the way we move forward, is to give everybody who has a legitimate self-defense concern, whether you're a cop or a nurse who walks through a dark parking lot at night, something that's much better, that protects you and doesn't put you at risk of spending a life in prison if you make a mistake or killing a loved one or all the things that could go wrong.
We're speaking with Rick Smith. He's the CEO and founder of Axon Enterprises, and they're based in Arizona. They are the developers of smart weapons that protect life in the moment of conflict. Lastly, Rick, wanted to ask about this because this is actually a little more, I guess, it's great, first of all, but it's a little more lighthearted than what we've been discussing, because it's a very, very serious topic. Now, at a recent shareholder meeting, I read that you unveiled a bicep tattoo to demonstrate your commitment to Axon's high-risk, high-reward stock performance plan. Now, my first thought when I read this was, well, that is commitment. There's no doubt about it. Not quite on the level of a 4-color face tattoo, with all respect, but that's a commitment. That's commitment. Tell us a little bit about this, and I understand that you weren't the only one. Is that right?
Yeah, so we are a very mission-driven company, meaning, there's lots of problems you can solve in the world and try to build a business around. We're really passionate about solving the issues about violence and police brutality and using technology to make our communities safer and building a business around it. And over the past year or so, we've put together a pretty innovative stock plan, both for me as the CEO and it actually now reaches down to every employee in the company, where we have some pretty audacious goals where if we hit them, we will have increased the value of the company by tenfold over the course of a decade. I've been talking with some other folks. We've been joking for years about getting the company logo tattooed as a sign of commitment. And as we all signed up for this new compensation plan, this idea came up, hey, now would be a good time to do the tattoo. And ultimately, I said, it'd be really fun. I'll design mine in a way where I have 12 markings for each of the 12 performance goals. The inspiration kind of came from the old World War II aces, right, where as they shot down enemy fighters, they put a logo on the side of the plane, right, of an enemy fighter. And so the idea I thought was kind of fun. I was like, hey, let's demonstrate our commitment. I'm going to get not only a tattoo of the logo, but do it with 12 markings that can get filled in as we hit each of our 12 milestones. It was kind of a fun thing to say, hey, I'm, as a CEO of a public company, I'm actually tattooing my financial performance scorecard on my arm.
Right. That's great. Well,
Yeah, now I got to get this thing done or I'm going to have a partially finished tattoo for the rest of my life.
Okay. Yeah, no, you can't. It's got to get, it's like the old joke, the guy that got decided to stop getting the tattoo while he was tattooing mother on his arm, right? And just said moth, and it just it didn't quite, the message wasn't really clear, right? Rick, great stuff. We really appreciate your time. And let folks know where they can get the book.
Yeah, so it's available, on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all the traditional places you'd expect. And again, it's called The End of Killing. And it also not only talks about sort of, non-lethal weapons, et cetera, but a more general approach to some of the most controversial technologies today, artificial intelligence, public surveillance, facial recognition. And the punchline of all this is, police are going to have to use technology to protect us. They can't operate with technology out of the 1970s and protect society in the 2020s. So I think we need to get past the simplistic approaches of, well, police shouldn't use artificial intelligence. that's just not realistic.
Right.
But we also want to be careful that we're not empowering police to go be abusing these technologies or infringing our privacy. And so the book is really an attempt to dig a layer deeper into, we need to talk about what are the acceptable use cases? How do we benefit the risks to our privacy with the benefits of reducing violent crime? And it's really been a fun topic to engage in with both civil libertarians and police to get past the echo chambers where we're yelling at each other and say, that's not going to solve anything. If we're going to make policing better, we've got to dig in and do the work about what role can technology play, how do we minimize the risks, and how do we use it to ultimately, create the world we want our kids to grow up in, where hopefully there's less violence and, people are safer.
Well, we all want that. At least I think we do. Rick Smith has been our guest. Rick, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
It's been awesome. Thanks for having me on today.
Rick Smith is the CEO and founder of Axon Enterprises, developers of smart weapons. He spoke to us today from Seattle. The company is headquartered in Scottsdale, Arizona. We'll be back right after these words.
You're listening to Work in Progress.
Executive compensation pros have one of the toughest jobs in HR. Seriously. They must always feel like they're about to step into quicksand, an alligator den, or on a landmine. You get the picture. Thank goodness for the Executive Compensation Forum, the one place where they can share freely, confidentially thanks to Chatham House rules, about common challenges and best practices to attract and motivate executives while being compliant with a host of regulations and keeping the board happy. There's a heavy focus on peer-to-peer conversations, in addition to connecting with and learning from the leading minds in executive compensation. The 4th Annual World at Work Executive Compensation Forum, July 28th through the 30th in Denver, Colorado. Go to worldatwork.org/events to register.
Things up on Work in Progress. My name's Tom Alexander, of course, along with Charles Epstein.
Hey, Tom. You mentioned to Rick Smith that I was on assignment. Was there a place I was supposed to be, a story I was supposed to be covering? I'm not sure I got this memo.
You didn't get the memo.
No.
Well, no, but I just couldn't say you couldn't make it because it conflicted with your Pilates class.
For the record, it didn't. But good thought. But unfortunately, I couldn't making it, breaking my very impressive streak of being there by your side for 30 consecutive interviews now?
Yes, pretty much Ripken-esque. It's unbelievable, that the consecutive streak. But as they say, streaks or records are made to be broken.
Yes. But, kidding aside, great interview. Though asking the Chris Rock question, I appreciate that. But unfortunately, it didn't quite get the laughs I expected.
No, it went over sort of like a lead balloon, didn't it?
Yes. Which, by the way, is not a technique or a projectile that Axon endorses. I don't believe that's in their toolkit.
Let's be honest, the subject does not lend itself to levity, that's for sure.
No, but I have to tell you, though, if what they do minimizes some of the stuff you see on these webcams, and if it makes law enforcement smarter and better at negotiating these situations, I'm all for it. Obviously, though, what's most impressive is the tattoo, but you made the exact right point. If it's not a full-color face tattoo, you're just not all in.
Yeah. I think we spoke earlier before the show, and both of us we're just not tattoo guys,
No. Although I'd make certain exceptions and certain parts of the anatomy to make certain points, but that's another conversation, yet another day.
That's true. And another show.
Yes.
And another network.
Exactly.
Yeah. Listen, and Ron Swoboda. I mean, what can you say? I know that was for you as a lifelong Mets fan, a special treat.
It was. I just hope I don't cause him to now actually have nightmares about that catch going the other way. I mean, it sounds like he's carved out such a great, rich life. I would totally hate myself if what I said did anything to throw that off balance.
Yeah, an impressive guy. You have to admire someone who just loves diving into a whole bunch of things: history, space travel, music, crawfish etouffee dishes. He mentioned that being in New Orleans is a vibrant art scene. It has jazz clubs, the food, and how he, to use his words, chased all that down.
Yeah.
He talked about how he executed several classic local dishes. I like how he talks about all the interests and manages to connect it back to his playing days. Really cool.
Yeah, that's a good catch, actually. Chasing it down, executed. No matter what he does, it's you can take the boy out of the diamond, but can't take the diamond out of the boy, I guess, Yeah. But it was great fun having a chance to relive some of the most memorable moments in my life with one of the principal figures who made it happen. And when we went off the air, I mentioned to Ron how he's been such a great ambassador for the team all these years. And you have to admire his honesty and his self-awareness, something you pointed out when we were talking with him. He knows how fine the line was or is between making that catch and not making that catch, and how much of his life was defined by that one highly improbable but amazing moment. And if you're a thinking man, and he's clearly a thinking man, it can't but make you get a little philosophical, or at least make you want to go to a lot of jazz clubs when your wife's sleeping.
Right.
Nice trick, Ron. But anyway, it was a thrill having him on. And I should mention that we're recording this as Tropical Storm Barry is about to hit Louisiana. So hopefully Ron and his family and his friends and neighbors in and around NOLA are okay by the time this runs.
Absolutely, and that city's seen enough challenge over the last 10 to 15 years. So yes, absolutely, we wish them the best with that. A fun show today, as always. Had a great time talking with our guests, and of course, Charles, with each other. Always a good time, and we'll be back next week with more on Work in Progress. We thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time. So long, everybody.
Let's go, Mets.
This has been Work in Progress, a World at Work podcast about work, life, and everything in between, with award-winning radio host Tom Alexander and WorkSpan's Not Safe for Work columnist Charles Epstein. For more, visit worldatwork.org/work-in-progress. That's worldatwork.org/work-in-progress. Join us next week for another edition of Work in Progress.